Welcome to the It's Your Story to Tell podcast, where brave people share their story to inspire others and what's possible. I'm your host, Megan Babcock, and the founder of It's Your Story to Tell and the Coach Collective. And today I'm thrilled to have Deborah Scott here with me. Thank you for joining me.
It's an honor to be here with you, Megan.
We're going to be talking about some difficult experiences of losing your mom, dad, and brother all in the same day, and the difficulties being placed in several homes. So we like you to have this information just so you can decide if this is a good place for you to listen, or if this is something that maybe you should come back to at a later time. And we just want to acknowledge the pain, heartache, the dark and desperate places that we can find ourselves when we're going through hard things. If you or someone you know are in this place, we want to encourage you to seek help. And if support's needed right away, please call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org. Before we jump in and we hear more about Deborah and her story of her journey through the hard, but also the amazing work that the Lord's done in bringing healing in her life, I want to give you a little background on her. And she has a lot of different facets about her. So I'm excited for you guys to learn all about her story, but she is an author, a worshiper, she's a singer-songwriter, and I love Wellness Warrior. That is, as a nurse, I am all about wellness and prevention. So that's great. She is very passionate about her faith in Jesus Christ. She became an ordained minister in 2007. And during that time, she launched Restoring Your Ministries, and this ministry was focused on bringing hope, healing, and restoration to the dying and broken world, which I can identify in that passion. That's what It's Your Story to Tell is all about. When that ministry closed, so that you could really focus on your family, you were a homeschool mom, and you also had a construction or have a construction business. So very busy with a lot going on there. And as your kids were going through school, it sounds like you were the director of that homeschool group. And when your kids graduated, you didn't leave education. So you became a substitute teacher, all while writing a book. So I'm tired just thinking about all those things going on in your life at one time. Your book is called Secret Chambers of the Heart, and it was launched in 2022. And you're in the process of getting it in print. So I know you're going to tell us a lot about that journey, especially towards part 2 of our episode. So, you guys, we're going to have Deborah here for 2 different episodes. This first one, we're really going to get to know her, the journey that she's gone on, and how the Lord is using her. And one of the ministries that she is participating in, we'll learn a little bit more about that, but is David's Tent. And I've had the privilege of going to David's Tent and praying there, and you are the representative for the state of New York. So that is amazing. Also, the co host for Friday night's Crazy Blessed Worship Live. That sounds like a really fun place to
That's
be
fun.
on a Friday. So, why don't you start us out and share kind of what your life was like growing up? And there was a pretty pivotal moment that happened in your life, and I'll let you kind of take us through that, and then we'll come back on episode 2 and you can take us through what happened kind of after that pivotal moment and up into where you're at today.
All right. So basically, I was in a situation where both of my parents were struggling terrible, and alcohol was involved, and things had escalated. And I was in a particular place when my mom had actually called social services and said, come and take the children. And I was not there. So my brothers were removed from the home. And then I was disconnected from them. And then I was also disconnected from her. And then my father went and got me help, but I ended up living in several homes for about 4 years. And until I was replaced back with my father, I was just shy of turning 9 when that happened. And so in my story, like in my life story, I just, a lot of emotions I didn't know how to cope with. And that was back in the day when people didn't really talk about emotions. That was back in the day when, hey, you've got a roof over your head and you've got food in your mouth. Do not complain. And so it was kind of easy, if you will, for me to just pack everything away. Just pack away what it felt like to have lost my family, the family that I knew. No matter how dysfunctional a family is, they're still your family.
Right.
And even if they can only love to like a minuscule amount of a capacity of love, you still love them. And so to have all of that change and start moving from one home to another home to another home, it was just like, it left a lot of feelings of, where do I belong? Who am I
That's
now?
understandable.
It's like, you go to this house and these are the rules of this house. And you go to this house and these are the rules of this house. And I was in a very difficult situation. I remember I do have memories of, I have clips. I have a really sharp mind. The Lord has blessed me with a sharp mind. And I have clips of like, when the one home I went to, I got scolded because of the alcoholism, especially that my mom had been battling. She did not tend to us like a healthy, mom could. And so we did whatever we could to eat. And so I just remember this one time, all the people in that family sat down to eat, and I just started walking around putting food in my mouth. I got scolded. I was like, no, this is not how you behave in this house. And I was sat in a chair, and this is a fork and this is a knife. And what's so interesting is that I remember that I had blocked that out until I had seen the movie from Helen Keller. And I watched what she did, and I'm like, oh, and it just like, it popped open the memory of what I had experienced. And so the homes I ended up living in, they had their hands full trying to take this feral cat, if you will, and train this creature how to be in a family.
Wow. Yeah.
But even though they gave me skill sets and stuff like that, it did not, how do I say this? I know everybody did the best they could. But at the same time, emotionally, there was no like recognitions of the emotions that I was going through. So I just carefully packed it all away, put it in a, closet within myself. And I would have memories, and I'd say, that poor little girl. I remember growing up thinking, that poor little girl. And just really keeping the safety barrier between me as an adult and me as that child. So
that makes so much sense, though. The way God created us is pretty miraculous, right? Because it allows us to survive some really, really hard things in the moment, right? You're getting through that. But then you're right. Like, if you learn skills to look a certain way and behave a certain way because this is what's acceptable, it's not touching the heart, the emotions, the wounding, and it can create, for me, I created perfectionism, people pleasing skills, and to deal with the things that I went through in order to get that approval, that acceptance. And it accomplished that emotional need in that moment, that desire to fit in or to be accepted, but it did not create connection, because in that place you can't be vulnerable. you have to show up a certain way, and this is what's acceptable. And that really led to some pretty difficult things in my own life of navigating relationships and things, because I had all these skills to be successful, but I didn't have the emotional maturity and the skills to be successful in relationships. I don't know if that was your experience, but I just was identifying with that compartmentalizing and how it works in that moment, but it's not a long-term skill that's going to create a life of joy and fulfillment. And so how was it for you?
Well, I think I learned very quickly how to adapt.
Mm,
I learned, in this house, this is what's acceptable. This is how you behave. This is what you need to do. Over in this house, it's a little bit different. And I I learned to I'm trying to think on relationship levels. As a child, I think I was one of those kids. I really appreciated teachers. So
mm.
because the
Makes
teachers,
sense of
yeah,
why you
why I ended up in
ended up.
education, because
Yeah.
school to me was the most rhythmic thing that I experienced. And no
Mm,
matter what school I went to, because there were years like after I went to live with my dad, well, he moved us every 2 years. So I was in a
mm.
different school district. And sometimes we were like, here you are, in the middle of the year, you've got to make new friends. And
Wow.
so you look
So hard.
around and you're just like, okay, how do I connect? And
Mm-hmm.
you do question, like, where do I fit in this world?
Mm.
And the
Yeah.
concept of having long-term relationships is a difficult thing that we live in during this time, just as a society. But I
Mm-hmm.
know I struggled with that back then, growing up. Like, how do I fit into this? How do I fit into connecting with the kids? And so, fortunately, I was an adventurous child. So, like, one time I remember, like, there was a time, I think it was early high school, I thought, well, maybe I like the arts department. And so I stayed after school, but that required that I walked home. Like, the bus would
Mm.
drop us off in the center and I'd walk a mile home. And so it's like there was a side of me that was just very willing to adjust, willing to adapt, willing
Mm-hmm.
to, I don't know, like, connect where I could connect. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm interested just as that played out over, and up to this point of where you had this pivotal moment. Like, how did that play out through those years after you were out of those school years, the younger years? Did it impact you in, your adult life, or were you, tell me about, kind of that space up until when things really you became more aware of kind of what was going on, and then God doing a work and a healing in your life.
I think for me, because I had packed away, and like I said, in my mind's eye, I was like, I felt sorry for that girl. If
Mm,
I had a memory, and I did, I had a fair amount of memory because I was a sharp child. I was sharp
mm,
and I learned pretty quickly. So in 2001, the Lord had me go out to a women's conference at Christ for the Nations. And I was with my spiritual mom at that time. And at this point in my life, I was a mom. I can't even remember how old I would have been at that point, but I wasn't, I was past the childhood years, past the teen years, past the young adult years. And so we were in a time of prayer. And I just remember being up at the altar And I remember this lady who was called the General. She was a
Mhm.
general in intercession. And she comes and she's an older lady, like,
Mhm.
not like she carried herself very well. But she came to me and she pointed at me. She says, "You young lady, you are running from your past, and God's not going to let you do it anymore." And I'm
Wow.
like, I'm looking at her and I'm like, What? What did
That's
I do?"
direct. First of all, it's like, how do you know? Like,
Yeah, how do you know? And she
yeah.
said something about my childhood. Your childhood was difficult, but God doesn't want you to ignore it or something like that. I can't remember exact words right now. But that planted a seed inside of me to let me know that God
Mm,
saw everything. And he didn't want me so disconnected inside. But I didn't understand why. I didn't understand why it was important, because you keep in mind, I've sat with school counselors and stuff like that, getting ready for the next year. And I, even in college, think about it. It's like you go in,
mm,
you're focused on your academics, you're not focused on what's happening in the soul. And so it's like it was new. And the Lord knew how he needed to reach me to let me be aware, like there was something more that needed to be done. And it was on a very soul level.
that is so amazing. I love those types of encounters with the Lord where he brings somebody else that would have no knowledge. So, it's like, and it matches your story, and you're like, okay, I'm listening. You've
You just
got my
read my mail,
attention.
lady. It's
Yeah.
like, whoa.
Like, okay, so now what? So, what I want to do is we're going to let listeners know where they can find you, and then we want them to come back and hear in the next episode about what began to transpire with this new level of awareness and where it's led you. So, how can people find your book, your social media or anything like that? And we'll also link those things into the show notes as well.
So I have an Amazon authors page, and it's under my name, Deborah Scott. And I tried very hard to get my name, deborahscott.com, but the way things go in the in the internet world is, if you have a name that they think somebody would want to buy, somebody
Uh-huh.
buys it, right? And so,
Right.
like, I could probably buy my name for like $10,000, but I'm not in a position to do that right now. So,
Right.
so what I've done for my social platforms is I've put the word the Deborah Scott, and I was able to get that .com. So it's the
Awesome.
Deborah Scott on YouTube, the Deborah Scott on Facebook, the Deborah Scott on TikTok, the Deborah Scott on Instagram. So I
Awesome.
am most active
You're
on Facebook.
everywhere. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
but
everywhere.
I'm most active on Facebook. I don't go into these other platforms and do a lot of things, but if somebody connected with me, I would respond. I would definitely would
Okay.
respond.
Amazing. Well, you guys come back because we've just heard about the journey, the hard, and you don't want to miss out on hearing about God's work after this prophetic encounter at this conference. Thank you for being here with us, and we will look forward to seeing you in the next episode.